Under what conditions and benefits is it safe to play the game of football? Most fall weekends in the Wright household are spent watching football. My 4-year-old son and I love to watch the game. It's fast-paced, there's action, there's big hits, it keeps your eyes glued to the TV. But ultimately, there's usually a hit that causes an ambulance to come out in the field and results in my son asking, "What happened out there, Daddy?" For this speech, I'll cover 3 perspectives on the game of football. The first one being that football, as it is right now, is safe to play. The second perspective I'll cover is the game of football with some modifications is still safe to play. And the third perspective I will cover is that the game of football altogether should be eliminated. Which perspective will you agree with? The first perspective I'll cover is the game of football is safe to play the way it is. I found a lot of people who are advocates of keeping football the way it is because of the many benefits of it and believe it is still safe to play. 2 articles I'll focus on is by John Harbaugh and Ed Riley. The first one by John Harbaugh, called Football Matters, was a very interesting article. John is currently the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens. In 2013, John led the Ravens to the Super Bowl title. In that game, he coached against his brother Jim. It was the first time ever that brothers had coached against each other in the Super Bowl. The Harbaugh family lives and breathes football. It's their life. So I found that John had a very interesting perspective on why football should be played and why it should stay the way it is. In John's article, he argues that the game of football is able to provide young kids life lessons that you can't receive nowadays. He says it teaches them about teamwork. It teaches them about not letting that person next to you down, about following through with what you start. He says the game of football taken away may cause more harm than it does good. I believe John has a very good perspective on this, being how he spent his whole life in football. The second article I found very interesting was by Ed Riley. Ed Riley is currently a professor of anesthesia at Stanford University. Based on his background of medical knowledge and also the fact that his brother is currently the head coach for the University of Nebraska, Ed is able to provide a good perspective on why the game of football should stay the way it is. In Ed's article, he says that current research is flawed. He says there's no controlled environments. He says that a lot of times these players that they have researched have also done other things in their life that may cause some of the trauma to show up in their brains that people are finding. He thinks that the game of football is just fine the way it is and should keep on being played. The second perspective I'll cover is the game of football, with some slight modifications, is still a safe sport to play. There was a lot of articles on this perspective about football. 2 I found really interesting were by Roger Goodell and Keith Pochak. Roger Goodell is currently the commissioner of the NFL. He's been the commissioner of the NFL since 2006. In this article, A Commitment to Safety, Roger Goodell says that in 2016, they're going to start an initiative called Play Safe, Play Smart. With this initiative, the NFL has vowed to donate millions of dollars to medical research to make the game safer. He also states that since 2002, the NFL has put into place over 42 different rule changes. With these rule changes, the game has become safer under his watch, and believes that with all the money that they're putting into research, that the game will continue to grow and be just as safe as it is today, and hopefully even safer. A lot of that money that they've put into the game has been put towards concussion research. He hopes that with this money, things will continue to get better in the NFL. The second article was by Keith Pochak. Keith Pochak is currently an emergency physician in Charlotte, North Carolina. In the article, Pochak states that with the game as it is, with slight modifications, it could still be played safe. Pochak argues that let's look at a few different things we can change. He suggests taking the helmet off of players. Don't have a face mask on the players anymore, and actually, if you had a helmet, let's have lighter padding in the helmet. He also thinks that putting 9 players on the field instead of 11 would spread people out, that would also lend towards making the game more safe. Pochek offers one other suggestion about shoulder pads. He thinks if you had lighter padding in the shoulder pads, you wouldn't see such violent hits. Being as how Pochek is an emergency physician, he knows a lot about head trauma and injuries, and some of these suggestions I found very interesting on how you could make the game more safe. The final perspective on the game of football is that it should be eliminated altogether. I was surprised to find how many articles were about wanting to eliminate the game of football. The first one I'll cover was written by two doctors from Minneapolis. Their names were Dr. Miles and Dr. Prasad. They wrote about ethics in the game of football. In their article, Dr. Miles and Dr. Prasad argue that the game of football is violent and causes many concussions. They say after you receive one concussion, the likelihood is 3 or 4 times more that you will receive another concussion. They said that is just way too dangerous to let somebody play. They also argue that with the game of football, we are starting to see a lot more lawsuits in high schools. They say these lawsuits will continue because high schools are not protecting their players enough and don't know the side effects of concussions. They stated in 2015 there was a lawsuit in the state of Iowa, actually, where a judge awarded a player a player and his family $1 million because that school neglected to give him the medical coverage he needed 4 years ago during a game. Miles and Prasad say these kinds of lawsuits will just continue as schools don't know how to protect their players. They say ultimately, between the lawsuits and the concussions, it's going to lead to the end of football. The last article I found on eliminating the game of football altogether was by Ken Reed. His article was also fascinating to read. He says that with all these violent hits, the game is just bound to come to an end. He states that the violent hits, along with the increased players running faster, getting bigger, causes bigger hits. He thinks that lawsuits and player injuries are going to end this game. He also found that more and more players who have retired or in the age of 30 to 49 end up with side effects of dementia, memory loss, and other mental issues that come up. He says it's not just a coincidence that these are coming up. These are from the side effects of playing football. Made a very strong case about that. I found all three perspectives on why the game of football is or isn't too dangerous to play very interesting, and I also found it interesting to some modifications that can be made in the game of football. You know, all three of these perspectives people are very passionate about. You have people who love the game of football, and you have people who use valid medical research to say that their perspective is the right one. So which one is the right one? That's a question I'll ask myself. I never knew that I would have a son who maybe would be interested in playing football. Before I had a son, I thought, I will definitely push him towards playing football. But now, after doing all this research on different things about the game being played, I may have to look at it a little differently. For my next assignment, I will disclose how I feel about the game of football and which way I'm going to lead my son and what to tell him when he says, "What happened to that guy out there, Daddy?"